Hello and welcome to Afterlife Topics and Metaphysics. This is Cyrus coming at you with a new video tonight. We're talking about the concept that brain injuries can heighten or even create psychic abilities. Why does that happen? How does that happen? I'm not a scientist, but I can report some interesting information. Maybe this will be of benefit to you. Before we begin, maybe some quick updates. Some of you were looking forward to a debate I was going to have publicly with author Anthony Peake, the guy who believes that when we die we have to relive our same life again and again in a parallel universe, similar to the film Groundhog Day. Of course, I greatly disagree with this theory, and I have been posting rebuttals of his first book on afterlifetopics.com. That debate has been canceled by Peake, who was offended by the fact that I was posting articles on afterlifetopics.com debunking his book. Apparently, he did not like that very much, despite the fact the articles are actually quite positive about many elements of his first book. So he canceled the debate and has instead said that he will possibly do like a retaliation on my own book, where he will review it as well, or probably attempt to debunk it. And then after he's done that research, then he would invite me on the show sometime possibly in October. But he has also alluded to the fact that he may just cancel it altogether. So if you were planning to watch that debate, that's now a no-go. I'll post the full thing on afterlifetopics.com later on about that. Let's just say this doesn't surprise me very much. Anyway, so with that news out of the way, I guess we should jump into today's topic. And by the way, I should point out that my screen may be covering up part of the slide right here, so I'm just going to make myself really small, I think, if I can do that with my software. There we go. Now I'm miniature Cyrus, so I'm not covering up the slide. This is one of the slides I've used on Afterlife University. I'm going to talk about it a little bit from my old PowerPoint I made. So brain injuries, do they equal psychic powers? Oh yeah, by the way, I didn't mention yet, please hit that subscribe button if you'd like these types of topics. Helps keep this channel going. I really need your help with that. So, Daniel Amen, MD, wrote an article called The Neuroscience of Psychic Powers, and he studied a correlation between frontal lobe of the brain and psychic abilities. In the study, he writes, psychic experiences are generally associated with a decrease in frontal lobe function, which means disinhibition, and increases or decreases in right temporal lobe functions, similar to what we see in seizure phenomena. The study continues, psychic sensitive people were more likely to be single or divorced people, which is interesting. Maybe single people have too much time on their hands and it's more time to commit to enhancing their consciousness abilities possibly. You can't do that if you have kids running around, at least not as easily. And people who had some time consulted a psychiatrist, maybe they have got some issues to work out. People who had experienced head injuries and serious illnesses. All of these variables more so than the controls. 66% showed evidence of right hemisphere and right temporal lobe dysfunction. Mystical experiences showed a trend toward being related to non-dominant hemisphere, usually right hemisphere dysfunction. So this is a very interesting study because, for one thing, you have non-materialist science being taken seriously by more and more academics and scientists, where these types of studies are appearing without the usual subtext of let's bring in the skeptic to remind everybody that there is no such thing as psychic abilities. Okay, with that out of the way, let's continue with the study. And it also is hopeful that there are possibly more institutions willing to fund research in these areas, as it has stood for since the inception of academia. Non-materialist topics are considered heretical, and they will not be taken seriously by academic institutions who are very busy defending the matrix to keep everybody in this basically knowledge prison and not allow access to information like this. So maybe we see this breaking down more and more. I'd like to believe so, but who knows? Maybe that's true, maybe it's not true. So in my class, I pointed out that there are injury victims that can be studied, such as Sean Lurwell, who was in a car accident, had a classic near-death experience where he left his body, observed the whole accident happening. When he returned, he had suffered a serious head injury, brain injury that resulted in massive memory loss, inabilities to maintain memories, and other effects. But he also stated how, as an after effect of the brain injury, he began to notice that he could actually physically see his wife's thoughts, and he's described as looking like a nebula, I guess, like swirling colors and stars. And he began to notice patterns in the seemingly random swirls that were the different types of thoughts. So suddenly he had access to be able to see something other people were not able to see. And that the thought patterns were malleable, so even he had the power to change somebody else's thoughts. And his point is that this is happening with everybody, but something switched on in his brain after the accident. He claims he's able to see those things. And then we also have the case of Dr. Jill Bolte-Taylor, who has a very interesting TED Talk, and she wrote the book My Stroke of Insight, which talks about basically the spiritual experiences that resulted in having had a stroke and switching to right temporal lobe dominance. So we're looking at different phenomena here, but the underlying point is that when the right lobe of the brain becomes dominant, suddenly it allows somebody to gain access to a great deal of abilities that were not previously there. Now this comes obviously also with a lot of dysfunction and I should say malfunction of the brain. So when the left brain is damaged, there can be a lot of very, very negative effects. I mean, the inability to read and write among those effects. The logical centers of the brain can be turned off, and then the right lobe has to take over, and then this kind of creates these kind of a sense of, at least in Jill Bolte-Taylor's case, hyperconnectivity to everything and everyone, which maybe we've heard about before, especially with people who practice meditation or people who have had mystical or transcendental experiences. What this stuff indicates is that maybe anybody has access to those states depending on the condition of the receiving tuning station inside the skull, known as the brain. Now what's really interesting about this, and something you could probably make a whole series of videos about, is the idea that our natural state of consciousness is probably in this highly interconnected state of existence, where you don't, you immediately feel everything around you, everybody around you, you hear their thoughts, feel connections with everything, as well as having the left brain function as well, being able to logically think, analyze, and deduce. So it very much seems like what the brain is doing is it's acting as this filtration mechanism that really mitigates those natural abilities, and the brain is functioning to reduce a natural state of very high consciousness down into a minimal state of consciousness, that is able to interact and explore a world like we're on right now. So this is very interesting because on one hand, the brain is something we're completely dependent upon. If we don't have that central processing unit active, then all of our thoughts can just fall apart and our consciousness can be reduced or diminished or become non-existent, at least temporarily while we're plugged into the brain. But once we're free of the brain, all of it becomes massively enhanced. Now this leads to an interesting concept as well I want to talk about, and it concerns, and I think I did a slide about this as well. I talked about DMT and things of that nature, but I also talked about the concept of there possibly being astral brains. And now, I mean, if this video hasn't made people scratch their heads yet, I'm sure it is now. So when we have out-of-body experiences in these astral domains of existence, it's quite solid like it is here. The question is, I mean, do we have anything inside of our skulls still? Or are we operating without the brain at all? So I'd actually argue it seems like there must still be some kind of a brain in effect. Maybe it looks like our brain, maybe it's something else, maybe it's the concept behind it, but the idea is that a device or a computer is needed to process higher levels of consciousness and filter it down into something that's more manageable and allows us to interact with people in a way that allows us to interact in the world without basically being overwhelmed. There was another interesting case about this from there was a guy in Russia in the 1800s who had the ability to remember or recall anything. So he had absolute mental brain function. I read about this when I've been reviewing Anthony Peake's book, who I mentioned at the beginning of the video. And like I said before, it is actually a really good book. It's called Is There Life After Death? It's just that I think the thesis of the book is really, really wrong, but the information is really, really cool. Now that's where I learned about this Russian guy who basically had full capacity of being able to remember anything that he's told, as well as other heightened mental gifts, but he was also in a way crippled by this power. It was like his mind was turned up to maximum capacity, but it left him barely able to function in society because of it. And so this was a well-documented case. In Peake's book, he alludes that this is like somebody who is living outside of the matrix, so to speak, somebody who is part of the real world as opposed to kind of the illusionary or projected or simulated world we're in right now, which to some extent I agree with, but really, instead of vilifying the brain, what we need to do is look at it as something that we use to be able to operate in different levels of existence successfully. And if we didn't have a brain mechanism filtration process, then on one hand we'd have this like much higher, even supreme level of consciousness, but it would make it difficult to lead a normal life and kind of do normal things and have some of the experiences that we want to have down here. So in this case, the brain isn't a bad thing, and it may be that the brain carries with it into other realms of existence as well. Maybe the astral body has a brain, maybe the light body has a brain, and then we go into so-called non-incarnated forms of existence where we're just like the often mentioned orb of light floating around. Now we're not using a brain at all, and maybe we have that higher level spectrum consciousness. But as always, as I like to point out in this channel, in my work, is that always a good thing? Do we necessarily want to have that unfiltered consciousness if it makes it difficult to develop as an individual, which I think is kind of why we're here. Maybe we need to develop enough properly as an individual before we start going back into those states. Or maybe we can have a brain or be in our astral body, but no longer be operating with the brain and then be operating from that level of consciousness naturally. My final point is that it seems like in all these situations you can take chemicals to artificially knock out filtration mechanisms and allow processing from higher consciousness. This is why Jürgen Zewey had the very interesting story that people on the astral plane sometimes take DMT to enter into expanded states of consciousness, just like we do here. Now, as somebody who does the out-of-body work as well, I have also been in that state of existence where I have done things like consume alcohol and experienced the same effects. Again, it hints at some kind of a brain mechanism that is still in operation even on that side, that you can still reduce or expand depending on what your goals might be. So more food for thought, complicated, wild stuff. Some people are not even at the point of believing that there can be out-of-body experiences, let alone an astral brain. If that is you, that's cool. But this is the stuff that I've experienced, I can report about, and other people can as well. But, it's up for you all to decide. So again, a really interesting subject. I'm sure we can learn more about this concept as we go on. I'm sure I'll have more videos about this in the future. But tell me what you think in comments down below. Have you ever had an experience out of your body and noticed you still have a brain that's working? Have you ever taken DMT or been on a trip? Has that resulted in spiritual experiences for you? And what about this stuff about left-right hemisphere? I've heard from private people telling me about how the people they've known have had medical conditions like strokes that have resulted in like total positive personality changes, going from extremely logical to suddenly being empathic, because that right lobe of the brain is now reactivated, and it had become dormant before, maybe because somebody was just using too much of their logical thinking, maybe because of a job or something like that. So those are some things maybe to chew on. If you like this video, head to afterlifetopics.com. You can support this channel by grabbing a book like Understanding Life After Death. It's a great book for people who are on the fence, or if somebody you know is like, hey, I'm curious about the afterlife, I'm not so sure if I believe it. Is there any actual evidence out there? You can whip out that first book I wrote, give it to them, and they'll really appreciate it. And of course, we have the Facebook group. We have the classes if you want to be a subscriber and help support the work I do. It's down below on the description if you click on Show More. And I guess that's it for this video, and I'll have a new video coming out as well soon. I wish my backdrop was better. Still, I'm in this little mini motel room in Japan. I don't have like a cool office or anything. At least I have a functioning microphone. Hopefully I'm not over-modulating the audio this time. My previous microphone had been stolen in a hostel, and so I bought a new one, and it's the same brand, but it's been a little bit wonky trying to get the audio just right. Hopefully it's better now. Anyway, I will catch you guys on the next video.